Ka tira nau mai haere mai koutou katoa ngā pia o tēnei hōtaka. Tēnei hōtaka e whakahaerengia e haimata, e kia nei ko me Upoko Pakaru, kia Rite. Welcome everyone to this second episode of me Upoko Pakaru. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by Uekaha Douglas. Uekaha is currently working for two different agencies. He's working for SWA as their Māori advisor, and he's also kaimahi here at Haimata Limited. And what Uekaha is, most passionate about is lessening the divide between Pākehā and Ngai Māori. And he'd love to see an Aotearoa where our whānau and Māori in general are thriving and are striving for the best. And not only that, Uekaha grew up speaking te reo Māori, and he continues to work hard to ensure that everybody has the opportunity and access to learn our language and to speak. So no mai haere mai e hoa.
Tēnā koe te aorangi, o te rā tēnā koutou, e mātaki mai nei, i tēnei hōtaka, ko wai tēnei, e noho nei I mua I tō aroaro, ko Uekaha Douglas tōki ingoa, he uri no Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Wai, te aupauri, te rarawoki. E mokopuna, no te nehe nui, no te no tā hoki. Tēnā rā tātou.
Tēnā koe hoa. And so today our webinar or our focus is going to be on Mihimihi, which is something that many of you will likely come across and will likely be involved in at some point over your careers, and in particular with a move, a large move within the public sector and private sector to be more inclusive of te ao Māori and te reo Māori. Mihimihi is a big part of that. So before we kick into that, I would like to ask Uekaha if he would like to do our opening karakia for us.
Oh, of course, bro. Wēnoi tātou, tui ai runga, tui ai raro, tui ai roto, tui ai waho, hui e tāi ki e.
Tai ki e. And just like we have with our first webinar, the opening karakia is about ensuring that we're ready for our learning. And as you can see in the te reo Pākehā there on the right, it's about bringing our full selves, our best selves together, both from a mental perspective, from an intellectual perspective, from a physical perspective, and from a spiritual perspective as well. And where we all come together to work over, to do mahi, to talk over a specific purpose or a kaupapa, and that kaupapa today is Mihimihi. Now, before we get into our kaupapa for today, as we have with our other webinars, and we continue to provide interesting facts around the status of te reo Māori, because we think that, or we believe that having a good understanding of te reo Māori and the path, and the struggle that te reo Māori has had over the last century, as a result of colonisation, and the effect that that the Pākehā speaking world has had on our language, we think it's important as a learner and as a possible language champion that you may be within your organisation or in your wider community. It's important to have an understanding of te reo Māori and its history. Now, at the moment, nearly 6 out of 10 Māori adults, and this was recorded in the last Te Kupunga survey in 2018, completed by Stats NZ, which Atawhai Tibble, who will be on our webinar next week, was involved with, and I'll get him to talk a little bit more about that in our episode on pepeha. But at the moment, it was recorded in that survey that 57%, or nearly 6 out of 10 adults, can understand some te reo Māori. And this has not been an easy feat. And currently figures are still sitting at less than 2% of the full population can speak. But of Māori adults, 6 out of 10 can understand some te reo Māori. But if we go back to the 200 years ago, or to 1840 when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, Te Reo Māori was very much a spoken language. And there wasn't much written in the form of Te Reo Māori on paper. And the language has evolved since then. And moving into the early 1900s, you saw this huge decline in the number of people and the how free-flowing the language was within the community and amongst Māori communities as well. And it wasn't really until 1970s or the early 1970s where we had what was called the Ngā Tamatoa movement, which really sparked the Māori language renaissance and all the Māori language revitalisation initiatives that we've seen over the last 50 years and so. And I'll get Uekaha to talk a little bit about his experience in the language in a minute. But the Māori Language Act was signed in 1975. And since then, we've seen a lot of revitalisation efforts happen in the form of what you may know as kohanga reo, or early childhood teaching in Te Reo Māori, kura kaupapa Māori. So this is primary schools and leading into secondary kura. And then you have whare kura and kura reo as well, which are specific Māori language programs or noho or wānanga, where the language is taught in an immersed environment. And another interesting fact, which is still being realised at the moment, coming out of Te Kupunga after some of the analysis and modelling that has happened with that, is that while the number of Māori language speakers continues to increase, the actual proportion of people that speak Te Reo Māori decrease. And people sometimes struggle to wrap their heads around that. And you may ask, well, how can that be the case? And it's purely down to population growth. And so the growth of the population is outweighing the percentage decline in those who are speaking Te Reo Māori. And the Māori language, and Māori people are quite a young demographic. And so you're seeing, quite a young population coming through who are benefiting from these Māori language revitalisation initiatives, such as kohanga reo and kura kaupapa Māori. And so speaking of this, I'd like to ask Uekaha to talk a little bit about his journey and about his experience in Te Ao Māori, and particularly, looking at it from when he started, and from, back when he was still a little young boy. So, kai a koe Uekaha.
Kia ora, bro. Thanks for sharing a bit of the history of Te Reo Māori. It's important that those who want to learn about Te Reo Māori, not just the language, but also our history. Yeah, very important. So Te Reo Māori was my first language. I think, like you, I grew up only speaking Te Reo. I think when we first met, you told me that you didn't speak English till you were about 10 or something, which is outrageous. So I was only half that. So I started speaking English when I was 5, and before that, I only spoke Māori. So, not as hearty as you, but still think, like, when you look at a 5-year-old, you're like, to not speak English until that age, that's pretty impressive. So if we want to go back a little, so my on my mum's side, both my grandma and grandpa, they grew up in little villages. My granddad in Otorohanga in King Country, and my nan right up north in Hokianga. So they were quite secluded from the big towns. So they were still raised on the marae, so they were still able to speak Te Reo. And I think it must have been their generation or a little bit after where, policies really took effect on, what do you call it? They didn't speak Te Reo, and then, my parents, they didn't grow up speaking. They ended up learning at a university where they met your mum, Hinihaya. So it was then where they realised that they wanted their kids to be raised in Te Reo Māori and Te Ao Māori.
And there were quite a few like that, weren't there? Particularly coming into the late, in the late 80s,
Well, you mentioned, sorry, cutting in there, kohanga reo and kura kaupapa. So that was big amongst, our generation and, a few that are just older than us.
Yeah. And so your parents spoke, your parents learned to speak Te Reo Māori at university, and so they made a decision to teach yourself and your brother Te Reo Māori, or get you immersed in that environment from a young age.
Yeah, so they sent us off to kohanga reo, to Hiringa Waka, which was the university-based, Victoria University-based kohanga, which was just down the road. And there I met, friends that are still my friends today, which are awesome. And they carried on speaking Te Reo. A lot of them went to Ngā Mokopuna, which is the kura kaupapa down here in Wellington. Unfortunately, it was a bit too far for us, for me and my brother to travel to. So we went to Reo Rumaki, which is total immersion at Watari. And most of my teachers there, they were from Ngāpuhi. So we learned a lot about Ngāpuhi Waiata and Ngāpuhi Mita.
Karawe. And I guess there's quite a few, there are many, part of it, who are part of our friend group, and those of our generation who share a similar story, and that, their parents suffered as a result of a lot of the actions that happened in the early 1900s, right through, particularly, and even our grandparents. And just like you said, my koro was not a Māori speaker, and it's only been, since a lot of these initiatives have come into play, and the Māori language has really made a lot of effort has been put into revitalizing the language, that has led to us, myself and yourself and many of our generation benefiting from that as a result of some of the hard work that our parents have put in, and that can be the same, and I'd encourage that all those who haven't had the luxury of growing up with Te Reo Māori, it's never too late. It's never too late to feed or to hand the language on to your tamariki as well. So thank you very much for that, Uekaha. Now, getting into our kaupapa for today's session, and we are going to touch on mihi and the Mihimihi, and we will give you a little bit of just a simple mihi and a structure that you can follow in order to ensure that you feel comfortable in an environment or in the environment where Mihimihi has been practiced. So if we come back to the real base, the word mihi, and mihi means to greet, and you will note there it says mihi is a verb. So verbs are doing words. So it is to greet. It's the process. It's the act of greeting. It's the act of acknowledging. It's the act of thanking. So to mihi is, as the slides say, to acknowledge, to thank, to greet. It's a doing word. And if we move on to Mihimihi, and we've tried to define what mihi is and what Mihimihi is, and for the purpose of this kaupapa, we see mihi as the verb, as the doing, and we see Mihimihi as the process, or the greeting process, which is a noun, and these are naming words. So just to remember, verbs are doing words and nouns are naming words. And the language is built up of verbs, of nouns, and other types of words when put together form what is the Māori language, and form other languages as well, of course. Now you will notice in the top left corner of the slides, of the slide here, we have a QR code. Now this QR code links to an external source from Massey University. So we would like to acknowledge Massey University. And it's just some, if you wish to find a little bit more out about the Mihimihi process, you can scan that QR code. I think there's even a cultural handbook that you can download from their website. Now Mihimihi happens generally at the start of a hui, or generally at the start of a wānanga, or of a meeting. And it's the point in the meeting where people come together to start the hui, and it's the process of what we call whakawhanaungatanga. And whakawhanaungatanga is where people come together, share a little bit about each other, acknowledge those who are running the hui, acknowledge, acknowledge our dead, acknowledge the living, the people that are present, and just being thankful, and making connections with those who are present, and that's what the Mihimihi process is all about. And in Te Ao Māori, and as you will know, Uekaha, Mihimihi is, mihi is a big thing. You got to, and as Atawhai said, who will be on our webinar next week, as he always says, you've got to do the mihi before you do the mahi. That's his little slogan or tagline, as you say. But it's very, very important to know that everything's formed on relationships in Te Ao Māori, and if you want to get to the mahi, or if you want to get the work done, then you've got to form those relationships, to start with, and the mihi process just adds to that and contributes to the outcome.
He also likes to say, he likes to say that whanaungatanga is our superpower. It's another one of his slogans.
No, you're dead right. And it's all these things that make Te Ao Māori unique and make Te Ao Māori what it is. And so we'll talk a little bit. You may be questioning what the difference is between Mihimihi and pepeha. And Uekaha and I were actually talking about this a little bit earlier, and we are going to cover this in our next webinar, which will be completely focused on what the pepeha is. But essentially, the pepeha is part of the Mihimihi process where you focus on yourself. You focus on the we, the me, who you are, who your ancestors are, where your whānau is from, where you're working, and who you are in your name, which forms part of the Mihimihi process. But essentially, the Mihimihi process is the overall overarching kaupapa or concept of acknowledging, greeting, thanking, and making connections. Ka pai? So moving on, we do have a simple mihi that you can use during the Mihimihi process. And I'd like to hand over to Uekaha, who will take you through our mihi here.
Kia ora, bro. Yeah, so as Tiarangi said, I'll take us through our simple mihi. So we will go line by line, saying the Te Reo Māori version and then a translation Pākehā version. So this is a simple mihi, and a simple mihi is a great way to start out. You don't want to be reaching for the heavens, the rangi tū haha for the big kapu, because you stand up, you'll feel the pressure, especially speaking a second language, you'll forget it all. So a simple one, a simple route is the best way to go. So yeah, so Te Arangi, just tell me if I'm going too quick.
Yeah.
Cool. Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings all. Ke te mihi, ki te kaupapa o tēnei hui. I acknowledge the purpose of this gathering. E mihi ana ki te mana whenua, ara, kia, and you'll notice it says ingoa, which in this case means name of iwi. So that depends on which rohe or region you're in. So in Wellington, especially in the city, you will acknowledge Te Atiawa and Taranaki whānui. Out in Porirua, you'll acknowledge Ngāti Toa Rangatira. Up in Whakatāne,
you will acknowledge Ngāti Awa, or you will acknowledge Tūhoi.
Sure, yeah. So we'll go over that line and I'll acknowledge our Wellington iwi. So e mihi ana ki te mana whenua, ara, kia Te Atiawa me Taranaki whānui. Tēnā rā koutou.
Ka pai.
So yeah, English version, I acknowledge the holders of the mana of the land, Te Atiawa and Taranaki whānui. Next line, o ti rā, tēnā hoki koutou, kua tae, a tēnā nā mai. I also greet you all who have gathered here today, and then tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, everyone. You'll see that throughout all mihi. Usually you just close off with tēnā tātou katoa.
Ka pai, and like I said earlier, you know, if you look at the aspects of this mihi, you will see that, you know, like I said earlier, that you acknowledge the purpose of the gathering, or you acknowledge the holders, or the mana, what we call the mana whenua, and those are the holders of the land, or the holders of the mana of the land. And in most instances, it will be the local iwi, or as I said, what we call the local mana whenua. And as Uekaha alluded to earlier, in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, or in Wellington, that will be Te Atiawa, or Taranaki Whānui. And in Porirua, that may be, you know, Ngāti Toa Rangatira, or Ngāti Toa. And in Whakatane, you know, where I'm based, it's Ngāti Awa. And you have other iwi such as Te Whakatohea, Te Whānau Apanui. So it's really important that wherever you're going, and if you're traveling for work, or if you are visiting a new marae, or you are going to a wānanga in a new location, it's important to understand who the mana whenua are, or who the local iwi is, so that you can pay due respect and acknowledge the people of the land. And then last but not least, it's important to acknowledge everybody who's gathered here. Now, I did say earlier that we do acknowledge the dead, and that will be covered next week in our webinar regarding pepeha, where we focus a little bit more on individual, you know, on acknowledging the dead. So just to run through the simple mihi one more time, I'll run through it one more time, so you can understand the pronunciation of some of the words. There will also be an audio recording on Moodle that you can access, and there will also be a poster which we will show you shortly, which you have access to, that has a QR code in the bottom left corner that you can scan, that takes you through to an audio recording, so that you can practice your pronunciation to ensure that you have your mihi perfected. So I'm going to use an example here in Whakatane, just to give a bit of variance to this mihi. I'll give a bit of variation to this mihi. A tēnā koutou katoa, kei te mihi, ki te kaupapa o tēnei hui. E mihi ana ki te mana whenua, arā kia Ngāti Awa. Tēnā rā koutou. O tira, tēnā hoki koutou, ko tae a tinana mai, tēnā tātou katoa. Now you will notice the word iwi after ingoa or name. Now you can choose to include that, or you can also choose to exclude it, as I did in my example. And just one last time, I'll hand over to Uekaha to run over this mihi before we move on.
Bit of a competition there, Barry. Tēnā koutou katoa, kei te mihi ki te kaupapa o tēnei hui, e mihi ana ki te mana whenua, arā kia te Atiawa, me Taranaki Whānui, tēnā rā koutou. O tira, tēnā hoki koutou, ko tai a tinana mai, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ka pai, awesome. Now just a couple of supporting resources that will help you to practice your mihi. And as we've provided one example of a mihi that you can use, that's not to say that that's the only example of mihi that there are, or that there is. There are many examples of mihi that you can follow, and this is just one of those. So what we've done is we've provided a couple of other links, and these will be available in Moodle, that you can click, and they will take you to another website where you can learn your mihi. Now, Te Taurawhiri has put out in 2020 an awesome an example of a mihi, or might have been early 2021, where it's 3 simple lines. And that's perfectly fine, and that's awesome. And that focuses on who you are, and where you're currently residing or working. Now on the left-hand side, you'll also see we have a poster, which is a poster containing the words of this mihi that we have gone over. And this is available for you all to download, and you may see this around your organisation or around your workplace over the next week. Now, just before we wrap up our session for today, we are just going to run over a quick learning tip, and it's important to understand a few learning tips that you can take away in order to practice and strengthen your language. And as we covered last week, we covered pronunciation, and it's important that we are able to pronounce a wide range of words and phrases, as we possibly can. So, our learning tip for today is use as many words and phrases that you have learned as possible. So, as you hear new words and new phrases, don't be afraid to write them down, and don't be afraid to practice the pronunciation. And you can do this either by looking in the mirror. I hear examples of people talking to their pets and introducing themselves, or saying, tēnā koe, kia ora, really simple phrases that you use on an everyday basis. That can, saying them to your pets or saying them to your partner. Ueka, have you got any other tips, or is there something that you used to do when you were younger, or something that you did that you advise people don't do, or advise our peer or our students not to do?
I probably have a bit too many examples of what not to do. Don't not study. Does that make sense? Yeah, do your study, because I guess not study, but as Te Arangi, just repetition. Use it to as many people as you can. Your pet, your kids, your partner, your mum, your dad, when you call them up, Zoom, wherever. That's a good way. Also, another tip is every morning, the first thing I do is turn on the TV and I watch breakfast. That's what I do. I have my breakfast while watching breakfast and have my coffee as well. And they use a fair bit of te reo Māori in there, and they just have a handful of phrases that they keep on using, but it's a good way to, get it stuck in your head. One they use a kōriki cloudy. I've never heard that word before, but now I know. It's just stuck in there now.
Awesome.
The old noggin.
And I've used, in the past, and I've really just recently discovered Quizlet. Quizlet's an awesome application that you can download, and it works just like flashcards, or just as flashcards would. And you can use, and you can put any new words that you learn or any new phrases, and their English or te reo Pākehā meaning, and put that into the app, and then you can essentially go in, and it has a whole lot of different ways in which you can practice those words just to get them ingrained in your head. And you only need to spend 5 minutes a day, and your vocabulary and your word bank will start to grow before you know it. Ka pai. So thank you very much for joining us for this session on Mihimihi. We hope that you have enjoyed it, and that the Mihimihi that we have provided you with will enable you to feel a little bit more comfortable and a bit more confident in an environment where Mihimihi is being practiced, or you're in the process of Mihimihi. It's definitely not an easy thing. I mean, I still get nervous getting up and doing a mihi in front of people, in front of a crowd, and I'm sure Uekaha would share that same feeling. And so you're not alone. You're not alone at all. And so we will come back and we will recap on this mihi later, later in a later episode. But for now, kia kaha, give it a go. Be strong, be courageous, and give this mihi a go. But wait, before we finish, I'll hand over to Uekaha to say any final words that he has, or any words of encouragement. And then I'll ask him to close our kaupapa today with our closing karakia. Kei a koe e hoa.
Kia ora, bro. Nothing too much from me. Just, yeah, reiterate what you were saying about getting up and doing your mihi. You know, it's not the easiest thing to do. But yeah, the resources that you'll soon discover will help you the best way that we've been able to help. Yeah. Help me with the words, bro.
Yeah, so the resources will help you to learn the mihi and to reinforce that learning. Ka pai.
Ana, koira.
Ka pai.
Yeah. Sweet. So I'll finish this off with our karakia whakamutunga and
Ka pai.
it's us. Yeah.
Ai.
Tēnā, me noi tātou. Tēnā whakairi a te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūri ki whakataha ai, kia tūri ki whakataha ai. Āmine.
Āmine. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi.